First, let's understand planets, what they show us. Planets represent animate things in our life. Animate things mean things that are moving. Means the wife, means the kids, means the teachers, means the friends. So the planets actually show us living, animate things. The houses represent areas of life. Bhava means a state of being. So you have the state of being that's your body. You have the state of being that's eating. You have the state of being that's your home. So the houses are showing the areas of life. Now the signs are moving through those houses. And they are determining what the situation in that area of life is. So we have the area of life, the situation in that area of life, and then we have the people and beings that exist in that area and situation. So those are our three factors. Three primary root factors. Houses, signs, and planets. Everything else is deriving from them. And if we want to go even back to a little bit more core reality, even the houses and signs are understood through the planets. So the planets are our root base to understand. If we go to page 4, the next section is planets. There are 9 planets used in Vedic astrology. 9. Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune are not part of traditional Vedic astrology. Some Vedic astrologers use them, but they are not in the classical texts. Most of the classical texts were written thousands of years before those planets were discovered. Some use it, some don't. What's important is to understand Vedic astrology without them first. If you have a good understanding of the concepts without them, you can, at your own discretion, utilize them. But first, most important is to understand the root 9 planets. And those root 9 planets are representative of the root 9 archetypal numbers. We start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and at 10 we begin repeating 1 plus 0, 11, 1 plus 1, 12, 1 plus 2, 13, 1 plus 3. We begin repeating. So that's the building blocks of the archetypes. So the 9 root planets are the 9 root archetypes that represent everything in this manifestation. So with Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune, we can even subsume those planets and their significations in with under those 9 planets. And often Western astrologers will say that those planets are like another planet. And this is what we do to fully understand that archetype. So those 9 create all things. And everything that you can even imagine somehow fits underneath of that. If you want to think about your head is connected to the sun. If we want to talk about your cars are connected to Venus. If we're looking at houses are connected to what's called Ketu, which we'll discuss in a minute. If we look at all food is connected to the moon. Within that food, we have foods that are connected to different planets, like peppers are connected to Mars. So in this way, anything that you can think of is connected and represented archetypally by one of the 9 planets. The better we understand these planets, the more the science of light will unfold as perfect intuitive understanding of a fully conscious universe. If we look at the chart on page 4, we see the name of each of the planet in one column, and we see its Sanskrit name. The sun is Surya, the moon is Chandra, and there's other names. Moon is also known as Soma. Mars is Mangala. Mercury is Buddha. Jupiter is known as Guru. Venus is known as Shukra. Saturn is known as Shani. Then we have what are called Rahu and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu are considered Chaya Grahas. So a planet is called a Graha. Chaya means shadow. So they're considered shadow planets. We'll go later into depth of how they're actually calculated and what does a Chaya Graha really mean. But for just a general introduction, when you see an eclipse, you see the shadow of the Earth moving over the moon, or the shadow of the moon. We see the shadows of those planets, of those grahas. Those shadows we see when they're crossing over something. But from the Vedic perspective, those shadows are always there, being projected out into space. And that shadow on an auric level is a graha, something that has the power to affect your life. So Rahu and Ketu in Western terms are called the North and South Node. In Vedic astrology, they're called the shadow planets, the Chaya Grahas. Each of the 7 planets that are physically existing is connected to a weekday. The days of the week are connected to physical existence. Thereby, the 7 planets that have manifested physical existence are connected to those 7 days. The 2 nodal planets, the 2 Chaya Grahas, do not rule days of the week. The sun rules Sunday. The moon rules Monday, or moon day. In French we have lundi, luna. Mars rules Tuesday. If we look at French, it's mardi. And Spanish, who knows Spanish? Martedi.
That's Italian.
Yeah. So it's Mars. Those days in all the languages are connected to the planets. For Tuesday actually comes from the German god of war, who is connected to Mars. We have Wednesday, which is connected to Mercury, which is Mercredi. We have Jupiter, who rules Thursday, which is Jundi. And the Thursday, it actually comes from the Nordic god Thor. So it's Thor's day. So English is an amalgamation of multiple different pantheons and languages coming together. We have Venus, who rules Friday, which is coming from the goddess Freya. And then in English we have Saturday, which is Saturn Day. So those 7 days of the week are connected to the 7 planets. Now, as a beginner who is trying to learn Vedic astrology, one of the first assignments I give my students is to make a notebook. And in that notebook, give 5 to 10 pages for each planet, each graha. And each day of the week, on Monday, do research on the moon. Try and go online, get different books, and explore the different meanings of the moon, the different significations that are ruled by the moon. On Tuesday, begin to study Mars, work with Mars, and spend a month or 2 just researching each day of the week the planet and increasing your understanding of each of those planets. The more we understand those planets, the more we can understand everything else, because they're the root foundation. Parashara gives certain significations of these planets, which are given in this book. Other ancient texts give different significations. One of the teachings I got from my Jyotish Guru when I first met him, the 2nd or 3rd time, I mentioned to him a few other teachers and texts, and he said, this is Kali Yuga. In Kali Yuga, nobody has all the gems. You have to go and collect the different gems. So there's no one text that's really going to have everything. on any one planet. You have to go and collect the gems. You have to have a various books and study, research. But the more you can learn about the planets, the better. So we'll begin by just deepening our understanding of the planets as Parashara teaches. One of the first divisions Parashara gives us is Somya and Krura. Somya means friendly, nice, beneficial, auspicious. Krura, we get the word in English, cruel, from the same root. So it means harsh, cruel, mean, destructive. If you look in the bottom of page 4, we have Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, and Moon are Somya. And we have Saturn, Rahu and Ketu, Mars, and Sun as Krura. Now, this list is in order of most Somya to least Somya. Most Krura, which is Saturn, to least Krura, which is Sun. The English translation of this, Somya is benefic, and Krura is malefic. So we have benefics and malefics. Now, what happens is, those houses that we said rule certain areas of life. So there's a house that rules home. If a Somya planet is in the house of home, then there's going to be good things happening in that area. If a Krura planet is there, there's going to be harsh things happening. Everybody has these planets. That means everybody has Saturn placed somewhere in their life. Everybody has Jupiter, meaning everywhere has that benefic planet somewhere in their life. Some people say my chart is so bad, or some people think my chart is so good. Bottom line is we all have everything in our chart. Sometimes Jupiter is stronger in certain people's charts. But bottom line is Jupiter is there in every chart. Sometimes Saturn is nicer to certain people. But bottom line is Saturn is there in everybody's life. We all have those same planets. So those planets are affecting everything in the chart. Another division of the planets is genders. The Sanskrit word is linga for genders. Now, Moon and Venus are female. Sun, Mars, and Jupiter are male. And Mercury and Saturn are neuter. This is according to Parashara. Rahu and Ketu. Ketu is considered feminine and Rahu is considered masculine. Now, to fully understand how these planets archetypally rule everything that can manifest, if we look at a young boy at birth, a prepubescent boy is connected to the planet Saturn. Saturn is a neuter planet. Before puberty, you're not really male or female. You haven't matured into being male or female. So Saturn rules the young prepubescent boy. Once a boy has hit puberty, he is Mars. Once Mars, a adolescent, gets married, he becomes Jupiter. He's in a relationship. He changes. This is why people change so much when they get married. They've changed from Mars to Jupiter. Then, if the wife dies, that person becomes like Rahu. Rahu is the widower. Where for a woman born prepubescent, that's Mercury. Mercury is the other neuter planet. So it's female neuter. Before the real sexual differentiation has truly happened. Then a woman, once she hits puberty, becomes Venus. Once she marries, she's still Venus, and once she has children, she becomes Moon, mother. If her husband dies, she becomes a widow, which is Ketu. So each of these planets are ruling some aspect of our life. That right there is an archetypal extreme. Right? We understand that as an archetypal extreme. So Parashara gives us a few general significations that we'll talk about to better understand these planets. As we see on page 5 in the chart, in verse 12 and 13, Parashara tells us that the sun represents the Sarvatma, the soul of all. So that sun is representing that aspect of your soul that's the same as the soul in everybody else. It's a very high level of soul. So when we say sun is Atma, it's that inner being. It's the inner being at its highest level. Then we have moon, and the moon represents the mind. Your thinking, feeling capacity. And on this level, it's general manas, all the general faculties of mind. When we get into Vedic psychology, we break down each of the specific aspects of mind within each of the planets. But as a general overruling planet of the mind, it's the moon. Like, for example, for cars, the overruling planet that rules cars, or I should even say the overruling planet that rules transportation and modes of transportation is Venus. And I say transportation because if you're riding a horse, that's also connected to Venus. If you have a car, it's connected to Venus. But let's say you have a small little car that drives really fast, a hot rod. It might be Venus, ruled by Mars. Where, let's say you have a work truck. That's Venus, ruled by Saturn. Let's say you have a train. A train is a mode of transportation. It's mainly ruled by Venus, ruled by Ketu. So we have main and then we have secondary rulers. So mind, for the moon, it's the general, it rules the mind and all its psychological processes in general. On a specific level, it's directly connected to the feeling part of the mind, where you have Mercury as the deciding factor. Mars is the logical processing. But in general, moon is that overall signification of the mind. Then we have Mars, who rules the strength and power in your body. Your ability, your willpower to get things done. We have Mercury, and Mercury, Parashara says, is the speech giver, which means he is ruling all forms of communication, be it speaking, writing, any way, books, literature, are all connected to Mercury. Then we have Jupiter, and Parashara tells us that Jupiter is knowledge and happiness giver. So Jupiter represents contentment, being happy with something. He also represents knowledge, and the deeper knowledge of wisdom, particularly. We have Venus, which Parashara tells us is the vitality giver, virya. Vitality, that life force in the body. Venus is also connected to sexuality and love. Then we have Saturn. Parashara tells us that Saturn is the giver of grief. It's that planet which brings sorrow and harsh things in life. They all seem pretty nice, and then we have Saturn there, right? Rahu gives us moha. Moha means delusion. Just not understanding. Being in our imagination. Projections in the world. And Ketu gives us spirituality, or moksha is the Sanskrit. There's something called the planetary cabinet. And the planetary cabinet is a way to quickly understand the planets. The sun is the king. The king is in charge and gives orders to everything. In that way, the Atma, that inner soul nature, is the king giving orders and controlling everything else in our life. Just as it is in the center of the solar system with everything else revolving around it. This is the Atma, the soul. And it's the king of everything else around it. The moon is the queen. The queen in general is in charge of the social aspect of the kingdom. What is the first lady in America? What's her role in general? She's the closest we have to a queen.
Pick out the curtains.
Primarily, but it's primarily a social position.
Perception.
Yeah. So, and this is the moon. Mars is considered the army chief, the general. He's in charge, he's giving orders, he's getting things done, but he follows the orders of the sun. So Mars is also connected to, besides just the army chief, anybody in the army as well as the police force is connected to Mars. Then we have Mercury. Mercury is the prince. He is the one who doesn't have power, but is soon to have power. He dreams of power, but he doesn't have it. His life is much more playful because the king is in charge, doing all the work. So he's learning, he's studying, he's preparing. We have Jupiter, who is the counselor or the minister. He's the one giving advice. He's the priest in the temple who, in some cultures it was the priest in the temple that gave advice. A king always has a counselor or council that gives him advice. This is Jupiter. And then we have Venus. Venus is also a counselor or a minister, but more along the feminine side. When we actually get into politics, if we're looking at politics, Venus is much more of the diplomat who is going in and interacting with foreign places and really working with two people getting along outside, where the Jupiter is primarily giving that advice for how to engage in a certain activity. Then we have Saturn, and Saturn represents the servants. He represents helpers, people that are in lower status positions. Rahu and Ketu represent the army, which literally what that means is the general masses. When you see the masses, what the masses of general people, what they accept, what they buy, how they're led, who aren't thinking for themselves. This is Rahu and Ketu. They take whatever is fed to them through TV and things of this nature and propaganda, and they follow it. So Rahu and Ketu in the planetary cabinet represent that aspect of reality. So that's a general introduction to the planets. That's giving us an idea of how we're trying to understand those planets, how we want to begin meditating on those planets. And the more we can understand those planets and the archetypes connected to them, the better we will be able to understand everything else in Vedic astrology. Because we understand that root archetype. Even when we get to the houses and signs, the houses are connected to a planet who shows what their energy is. The signs are ruled by a planet who is giving either their feminine or masculine energy. So the better we understand those planets, the better we understand everything else. And in the same way, we find that we have situations where certain planets get along well and certain planets don't get along well. For example, Saturn and Sun don't get along. How well do you think the king is going to get along with the servants? The king is not spending his time hanging out with servants. President doesn't just come and hang out with people who are working in the field, who are making shoes, who are doing smaller menial jobs. Who the king or president ends up interacting with is big counselors, advisors, other kings and presidents. So we can see that the planets are interacting relative to their archetype. Thereby, the more we understand them, the better astrologers will be.